Lawyers of Reddit, what are the craziest yet legal, last will and testament stories you had to deal with? Story 1. I worked at an attorney office and little older lady gave her house and her belongings to a bus driver. The bus driver was nice to her and would help her. We were all waiting for hell to break loose when her family found out. Comment 1. Lol. Welcome to the US legal system. Basically at the start of any litigation you size each other up and measure to things. How big is my stack of money? How big is yours? How strong is the case? And it is important that this is secondary. If your pile of money is big enough you can drag the case out so long that the other side runs out of money. Basically the only time the little guy wins against something with deep pockets is if they have a pro bono, contingency attorney willing to eat the fees and keep fighting. Court costs, legal fees don't always get assessed to the loser. And even when they do it doesn't really matter because you need to be able to float a massive pile of money for years to get there. Most people get a couple of hearings in and either settle or quit, even if they do have a decent case. Story to military lawyer here. Had a young client come in for a will before deployment. He put a request to be buried in blue jeans, a Chris Jericho t-shirt, and his replica Wii Championship belt. Happily, this airman didn't meet any misfortune on his deployment. Story 3. Not a lawyer, but paralegal. We had a dying client in hospital change her will by recording it on a smartphone. It set a precedent and made the local paper. The lawyer in question has the page from the newspaper framed in his office. Comment 1. Not up. I am gonna do a search and find it. But when I was doing my upper year contracts course in university we covered a case where a farmer had gotten stuck under his tractor. He thought no one would find him in time so he carved "I leave it all to my wife" and it was deemed a legal last will and testament by the courts. I would imagine the tape recording would be the same. Edit. Typo. He said wife not life. Story for the Great Stork Derby was when a wealthy Canadian left a substantial amount of money to whichever woman had the most children in the 10 years following his death. It was upheld through numerous court battles and for women tied with 9 children each. 2 women were also given smaller payouts. One had 10 children, 2 were stillborn, and another had more than 9 kids. But a few were illegitimate. The guy also had some other interesting things in his will and was a known practical joker. Story 5. Where I went to college, there's an oak tree that was deeded to itself in a man's will. Now called the tree that owns itself. It sits in the middle of a road and you have to go to one lane to drive around it. Story is that a man loved the tree so much as a kid, that around the time he died in the 1830s, he gave the tree possession of itself. This technically wouldn't stand up in a court of law, but the county and local populace has accepted it and takes care of it. The original tree actually died and the current one is a product of one of the acorns of the original. Story 6. I work for a lawyer who does wills. We had a lady put in her will that one of her adult sons was not to receive his share until he visited a dentist and the other son lost 70 pounds. Another lady put in her will that she wanted her cats cremated with her when she died. Told her that is not going to happen. Human remains and animal remains do not get cremated at once. So she settled on cremated separately and joined together, then buried together. Typically wills are about 10 pages for the average person. We had a lady who had a 56-page will. She detailed everything from her house to people wooden ladle to toilet paper holder to magazine basket to etc. for every single item in this lady's house. We had a man put in his will that his family was to go to the zoo immediately after his burial that day. We thought that was more heartwarming. We had a lady that told us to put in her will that she wanted to be buried on her property next to her husband. She lived on a small rural property, totally illegal to have human remains buried there. Refused to tell us whether her husband was cremated or not and had dictated that she did not want to be cremated. Edit. Her husband had died 5 or 6 years prior, so it is not as though it was 50 years where things like that may have been a little overlooked. We work with many people from a certain religion. A lot of people we do wills for leave at least 90 of their estates to the church instead of their families. Comment 1. Euthanized to be buried with her. I was so pissed off. I told the lawyer that as absolute nonsense, and though she agreed she had to put in as instructed and hoped that living family members at the time of her death wouldn't uphold that part. Comment to veterinarians. Don't have to euthanize an animal just because a person comes in and requests it. We have definitely had cases where the doctor refused to euthanize a healthy animal for a person's convenience. We will give them info for local shelters and rescues so they have options for surrendering the pet. Comment 3. That was very common. Everyone from the Norse to the Chinese buried tons of grave goods with their leaders, often including sacrificed people and animals, though I will give the Egyptians points for sheer scale. Comment 4. Can I bury grandpa in the backyard? Burial on private land is allowed in most counties in the United States, as long as certain requirements are met. The site must meet distance from municipality requirements and have a minimum number of acres. A family burial plot or cemetery must be registered with the county government. A declaration of use should be accompanied with a plat map, showing the exact location of the burial place. Obviously, all of this paperwork takes time. It should be completed well in advance of any anticipated death and burial. Don't believe the funeral industry hype. Hoops are out there, but you can jump through them. Story 7. My dad is a lawyer and a friend of my grandpa, who was in his 80s and had end-stage cancer, made his will. He was a big fan of weapons and wanted to give them to my dad. He is a fan too. He left him 2 shotguns, a Glock, and a revolver. My dad told him it would be better to write it in the will because my country's law says you can only own 5 weapons at a time. My dad had already 4 at the time, so he would have to give some up, but if you inherit them, it doesn't add to the limit. So they made a testament and he gave him the weapons except for the revolver, because it was his favorite and didn't he want to give it away yet. My dad instantly knew why, but didn't he say anything. 2 weeks later the guy ended his life with the revolver. He still hasn't. He got the revolver because police still has it. He never told my grandpa that he knew, but he didn't he want to take this guy's chance of ending his life on his own terms instead of waiting for the cancer to win. Story 8. Not a lawyer, but I had an experience with this years ago. Rich uncle of mine, real crazy, not in a good way. He would come to visit us when we were kids, maybe once every 10 years. Last time he did, he brought us to a Denny's. He met my brother in an airport, was there for an hour before he got on another plane and went home. When he died he had no friends. He had driven his wife to basically drink herself to death a few years prior. He left his entire estate to an Elvis impersonator, everything. Story 9. My great-grandmother did this, left everything to her daughters and granddaughters. Will stated explicitly that they were to use the money to get a divorce. My mom was like, I don't want a divorce, and the lawyer was like, yeah, we can enforce that. Here as your money. So my mom and dad spent the money updating their house. My great-grandfather was not a good husband or father, very abusive. My grandfather was deaf in one ear thanks to him. My great-grandmother outlived him and didn't he want her daughters to be trapped in a marriage like she was. She meant well, but I don't think anyone used the money to get a divorce. Story 10. This large French farmer's family had been fighting each other for 15 years over their parents' estate. Everything and anything had been a weapon in this all-out war. Debts, spoils, barns, plots, cows, wills, and whatever. Defeats followed victories. Failures followed compromises, but progress was being made, and at some point the killing zone turned to a standstill. Everything was agreed as long as no one talked antiques, jewelry, furniture, kitchenware, photographs, laundry, or tools. A long protracted period ensued, any goodwill tentative harshly discouraged before even being aired. Time went on with no issue in sight. Then someone suggested they just drag all the stuff into the farm's courtyard, pour petrol on it, and set it all afire. Story 11. My brother used to be a paralegal, and he said that a group of 3 siblings, I believe 2 brothers and a sister, almost came to blows because the inheritance didn't divide into 3 evenly. There were 2 pennies left over. Story 12. Estate lawyer here. I could tell so many stories. Sisters fighting over deceased brother's dining room table, ending in an accusation that one had harmed her own husband. True believers who were convinced the rapture was imminent and only saw the value of completing their estate plan when I explained the mess those of us left behind would have to deal with, including their stuff. A guy who got married days before his death to a longtime girlfriend. Long story. Did a will, disinherited several kids but not all, and somehow everything worked out okay with minimal disagreement. Several stories where a family member is a lawyer who practices in another area of law in another state or doesn't practice at all. Guaranteed craziness. I could go on and on. It is the absolute best line of work, super fulfilling, great stories, get to know families, and walk meaningful paths alongside them. Story 13. I mean, it is not that crazy, it is depressingly predictable. Rich old aunt, the only one in her huge family with any money, having been a doctor on the Upper East Side of Manhattan. She set up a living trust to take care of her poor relations in the Philippines, to continue as a death trust whenever she died. Her favorite niece was in control of the trust. And of course the niece was responsible and even-handed and never ever embezzled any of the money to set herself up as a newspaper publisher and concert producer and media mogul with new expensive cars and lots of first-class Pan-Pacific travel. Nope, not her. Haha, of course, the trustee did all that. Hundreds of thousands of dollars missing, and an unholy mess of sifting through money transfers and property purchases in 3 countries. The niece also had a bigamous marriage to some loser in the Philippines. Her legal husband in North America was bedridden and dying slowly, to whom she sent buckets of her aunt's money to build a luxury villa. She vehemently denied such a relationship existed. She also had photos of the wedding on her Facebook page. Not the smartest embezzler out there. from where I sat, in the attorney's office representing the poor relations trying to stop the trustee's embezzlement. The craziest part of it all was that after years of fighting, we finally got complete financial disclosure for the trust on like December 22. And it was such a Christmas miracle that I almost put off my Christmas trip to Nick to gleefully pour through every poorly redacted line of it. Also, we had the rich old aunt's ashes sitting on our bookshelf for years, since the dispute about what to do with her remains was part of it all. Story 14. Not a lawyer, but I have a crazy story. My grandma's sister was a narcissist and extremely vindictive. She and her husband gained a significant number of assets over the years, including a somewhat profitable farm with over 100 acres of fields. They had a few children, all boys, and they all had wives and children of their own. Her husband died about 6 years before she did. Somehow, in their 50 years of marriage and living on said farm, had they never bothered to go to a lawyer and write a will. Instead, she wrote a note and left it in their safe of legal documents saying that nothing was to go to wife of son who died almost 20 years ago, or her children and said aunt's grandchildren. This, because the son's wife was more outspoken and wouldn't he be controlled by her, and absolutely despised her and my entire family too. So everything went into probate and the kids are still trying to get everything squared away a year later. But the people she wanted excluded should be getting something out of it too. Story 15. The local newspaper ran a story with pictures of a house that was left to a cat when the owner died. The cat was the only occupant. The woman's lawyer maintained the house for the cat from the deceased owner's trust fund. I always wondered if there might have been a little motivation to hasten Kitty's demise. Comment 1. Dear Mr. Tidlessy, trust this finds you well. Please find below Beagle fees and costs for Junior Associate Max Lavington attending to your matters. 2 hours. Researching current trends in cat food 7,001 hour. Travel from office to Whole Foods 3,501 hour. Travel from Whole Foods to Mr. Tiddle's residence 3,503. 5 hours. Attending to well-being of Mr. Tiddle's 12,250. 1 hour. General admin on estate. Research into animals as beneficiaries tax rules. Petitioning state legislators on amendment to tax code. Consultation with Veterinarians Society of America on lobbying efforts. Drafting letter to Congress as interested party on behalf of Mr. Tiddles. SOA. Follow-up calls. 35 disbursements. Cat food 30. Guess 5 total. 2,695. We look forward to payment on our standard 30-day term and thank you again for choosing Beagle for your legal services in this competitive market. Sincerely Beagle Sr. Story 16. Not so much the original will itself but the aftermath and greed of the siblings. Almost none of them talk anymore. 10 total. They ray fighting over a couple hundred acres, most of which is swamp. The greed part is they had the original will amended. Every grandkid was supposed to get a portion in the original will along with the siblings. However, the siblings nixed that via courts. They were going to then split the property among themselves, but the executor just didn't give a damn and let it sit for 30 years without doing anything. The rest wanted it done, so court cases, massive debts. Finally, the executor no longer has control. Thanks to the court cases, the property was in massive debt, which is sort of paid off right now. And now they are all too old or dead to do anything with it. If the will had gone through as originally stated, the family, which consists of about 35 grandchildren, would have all been happy there or had money for selling the property, which is worth about 35 a lot. Now it is probably just going to go under eventually for non-payment. Even if I could buy some of it for cheap, I am not touching it with a 100-mile pole. Story 17. Fairly new lawyer. Haven't had that much in wills. Arias family is where the real fun is. But did have a woman with dementia come in to do her will, then come in a few months later to change it, because her condition was worsening. I did a capacity assessment and she seemed to understand what her old will said, what her new will would say, why she was changing it. Wasn't suddenly cutting anyone close out. So I made the changes, told her okay, but warned her that I might not be able to make future changes due to concerns about her condition. A week later she comes back in and she is in rough shape. She remembers me but her eyes are watering. She has some trouble explaining what is going on. I realize she is not even trying to change her will. She is just sort of here because she is scared about the changes in her head. So I get in touch with the person supposed to be caring for her. I talk over her will one more time. I tell her she has done everything right, her will is safe, her family knows where it is, etc. When I said goodbye I told her I hope to see her again, and she smiled and said she didn't think we would. I teared up a little. We left and chatted through her original will, discussed the best ways to do things. Seeing this formerly confident and witty woman, still keeping it together but obviously so concerned and knowing it was a one-way downward path. It sucked. I don't know how she is doing now. Story 18. Not a lawyer, But when my dad was growing up, there was this little old lady across the street without any family. She was from Finland and her husband died during World War I. She immigrated to the States and had no one. So my grandparents would knock on her door to chat, take her grocery shopping, etc. They made my dad and brother help out around her house, yard, etc. She loved my dad and uncle, treated them like her own kids, cookies and treats and presents. When dad was in Vietnam, she would record him voice messages on tapes and send them to him with letters telling him what life was like in the neighborhood and how she hoped he'd be home safe soon, that she prayed for him, etc. When he came home, he'd stop by to chat and help out around the house, bring her macaroons and just sit and talk for a while. One day Ms. Lingard died and a lawyer called my grandparents. She had left them a sizable amount of cash and stock, and her paid-off house to my dad and his brother. My family had thought she was penniless. Never underestimate how much little, simple things can mean to people. You just might be one of the best things in their life. Story 19. I am not a lawyer, but my school lucked into its art museum because of William Ackland's crazy will. He donated a ton of money to Duke for an art museum, on the condition that he be buried in the museum. Duke noped out of that little clause in the money, so Unc happily accepted the gift, built the Ackland Art Center, and you can go see his tomb right there in it. I enjoy sharing this fun little piece of trivia when I give tours. Story 20. I was in rehab with a guy whose grandmother left him $5 million if he could quit heroin for 2 years. He would have to wear one of those drug patches that the courts use for probationers the entire time, which are exceptionally hard to fool. $5 million. Slam dunk, right? This was 2007. Last time I saw him was in 2013, nodded out in a Fleabag motel, while I left to pick up another sack. I got arrested, made the decision to quit and never saw him again. Who knows, maybe since then he has cleaned up. Story 21. My grandpa gave all his belongings to my father, who was the youngest of 4 brothers and 3 sisters while my grandma was still alive. Grandpa told my dad that he gave him everything rightfully because he believed my dad would split everything equally. Grandma wanted her property back. Dad at the time only 20 obeyed his mom. Big court case several years later between all the brothers because it was indeed not evenly split. Still going strong to this day with no grandma around anymore. Grandpa was a wise man, just miscalculated. Story 22. I am not a lawyer, but I have a sad story that fits here. My great-grandmother and grandfather had a will that would give their 6 kids a fair share when they both were dead. But my grandfather passed and the oldest of the kids, the jerk, took it to court to get his part even if the will said that they would get their share when both were dead. This made my great-grandmother lose everything. She didn't get to handle the sorrow of losing her husband whom she had been married to for 68 years. Instead she had to go to court many times and then she lost the house they had built and almost everything she owned. We helped her get an apartment and tried to keep her happy. She deteriorated quickly after those months. I hate how someone can let greed come between families. I've never met the jerk. Story 23. Not a lawyer, but the Hajette Clark story is utterly fascinating to me. She died in 2011 at age 104. She was a wealthy recluse daughter of a copper baron, who hadn't seen any family since her mother passed away. In 1963, she lived the last 20 years of her life in a hospital in Manhattan, having contact with only a handful of people and rarely had face-to-face interactions. Of her $300 million fortune, she gave most to charity including her palatial estates, $30 million to her longtime nurse, $1 million to the hospital, money to the caretakers of said palatial estates, her accountant and lawyer, and nothing to her distant relatives, except all that was written in her second will, which was written 6 weeks after the first. Here is a detailed story about the legal battle. Comment 1. I am sitting here shaking my head. That is such a miscarriage of justice. TL. Drive for anyone who can be bothered clicking the link. Her relatives popped out of the woodwork after she died after not seeing her since the 1950s and 1960s. Lots had never met her. They then claimed the reason they were purposefully left out of the will was elder abuse by Hajette's carers and, or Aunt Hajette had lost her marbles. This claim was investigated. Hajette was found to be lucid according to medical records and notes she'd left, and there was no legal case to be made against her lawyer, accountant, nurse, personal assistant or the hospital. So, no elder abuse. Despite this, her nurse, lawyer, accountant, and the hospital all had their inheritances stripped or massively pruned by the courts. The nurse and the hospital were also made to return gifts that Hajette, a very generous woman, had given them while alive, to the tune of millions. The relatives received close to $35 million. Not bad considering they hadn't seen her in 50 or 60 years, if they'd met her at all. and mangled Hajette's vision for an art charity that she'd set up in her will, getting themselves seats on the board of directors and changing things up, and also putting them in a position of permanent oversight of Hajette's not inconsiderable art collection. If my reading comprehension is switched on yet only halfway through my first coffee, I am on my phone so I can click back to check. If I am wrong, my bad. The New York Attorney General put himself on the board too. Not dodgy at all. Edit. It says the Attorney General formed the board. I don't know if he has a seat on it. Probably not. Story 20 for not a lawyer, but this is a will story my great-aunt told me. It has basically just a lot of jealousy and family drama. I am not good at telling stories, so please bear with me. There was an old woman. We will refer to her as Granny or G, so I don't have to keep saying old woman. Granny was a sweet old lady, relatively healthy but had some trouble getting around and taking care of herself. Her family was the typical greedy and money-hungry scenario, only calling when they wanted something. I don't know the full story involving the family, but they stuck her in a nursing home and moved far away. To everyone's knowledge, Granny had very little money, but she still owned her property, a small house her best friend my great-aunt took care of, and her car, a customized classic VW Bug. The nursing home had volunteers, people to come and talk to the residents, play board games with them, basically keep them occupied. Granny's favorite was a newer volunteer, a 19-year-old girl who I refer to as V. I only met her a handful of times, but V was a very soft-spoken and kind girl. V was the only volunteer Granny liked, because they had many things in common, one of those things being their mutual love for a specific kind of car. Hint. Over the next year and a half, V continued to volunteer about twice a week. Soon, Granny started to get sick, her health started to rapidly decline. Did her family come to see her? Nope. Until her last days, she only had V and my great-aunt. Granny died. Some of her family came to the funeral, but pretty much everyone only cared about the will. My great-aunt said that the only ones who seemed sad at the funeral were herself, V, and a few of Granny's old friends. When it came time to read the will, there was a big shock. It turned out Granny had a decent amount of money stashed away, about 10. The family had no idea, only my great-aunt knew about it. A small amount of that was split up and given to select family members, but the rest was divided and given to my great-aunt, and VV was in complete shock. The family was mad. A few other things were given to family, select items that didn't hold a whole lot of value. But it was about to get worse. The car I mentioned earlier, the classic Bug. Granny's teenage granddaughter had her eyes on that car since Granny was put in the nursing home. Everyone expected her to get it once G passed. That didn't happen though. Like I said, one of the things V and G bonded over was their love for bugs. G had shown V lots of pictures of her Bug, and V enthusiastically told G all about her own Bug. My great-aunt wasn't really a fan of the car. I liked trucks, and she said that she and Granny discussed leaving the Bug to V in the will, which is exactly what G did. If the family was mad about the money, they were furious about this car. I've seen pictures. This thing was nice. Granny probably loved it more than anything, maybe even my great-aunt. And according to her, V cried her eyes out, like she had to leave the room. She told my great-aunt, I can't accept it. I am not family, that car should be yours. And my great-aunt spent over an hour and a half convincing her that G wanted her to have it. Some family members followed V outside and started screaming at her, threatening to sue her, claiming it was part of a plan V must have created. What? Befriend a lonely old woman and take her fortune, telling her she didn't deserve any of what she got and calling her awful things. One of the calmer relatives got things settled down and my great-aunt got V out of there. It has been a few years. My great-aunt and V still talk, and V still has Granny's Bug. As far as I know, after the reading of the will was over, V got a lot of nasty messages online but was otherwise fine. One of the family members did contact a lawyer, but they must have told them there was nothing that could be done since V never actually got sued or anything. Story 25. I have heard that if a charity is a percentage recipient of a will, they will sometimes send lawyers to make sure that all the accounting is done to ensure their share is the full size granted, in effect tying up probate for years and greatly increasing costs. Lawyers suggested instead only granting charities a specific account to avoid the problems. Any truth to that? Story 26. There was a case story from someone who was in law school, of a generational trust. This says, all my grandchildren get money when the youngest reaches the age of 25. The youngest grandchild was 24, and they were all making plans for their inheritance. Plot twist, one of the sons remarried, and had a baby, a new heir, when the other grandchildren were 24. So they had to wait until they were 50 to inherit. Edit. I asked if the baby had a bodyguard, and my friend didn't know. I think one of the grandchildren was in law school and was a classmate of my friend who told me the story. This was in the 1990s, I believe. Story 27. Don't practice in this area, but just thought I should mention that wills blow and can easily be flawed and possibly wholly or in part be void for minor imperfections. Example, some states require that the two witnesses actually see him, her sign it, whereas others only require them to be in the same room and aware that it was signed. Long story short, just do a trust instead. Comment 1. This is terrible advice. The choice between a trust and a will can be complex and involves a multitude of practical, legal, financial, tax, and family issues. There is no one-size-fits-all advice like just do a trust. That as the junk one hears at a presentation from a trust mill. Also, trusts don't mean anything if you don't fund them. A typical trust that would replace a will, and those trusts need to be accompanied by a different type of will with the same signature requirements. Requires people to retitle many of their assets. Got a home, retitle it to the trust, trustee. Got an investment account, retitle it to the trust, trustee. Other assets too. If that is not done, the settler loses much of the trust's point and paid a bunch more for a trust that becomes wasted money. For anyone considering estate planning, read up and talk with a lawyer who does this stuff for a living. Story 28. Not in the will, but my mother left her estate to me and my 4 brothers, share and share alike. My oldest brother was physically and mentally disabled. A few days before she died, she asked one of my other brothers to have all of us turn our shares over to my disabled brother. Keep in mind, he was getting disability, lived in a nice group home, had all of his medical covered, and risked losing this if he had any substantial assets. Also, my brother who spoke to my mother asked that the money be put into an irrevocable trust. This means that if my brother passed, the money would go to the state of Pennsylvania. My brother was in very poor health, and my mother's wishes were never codified into her written will. We met for a breakfast meeting, me and my 3 other brothers, and 2 of us agreed to the trust, and me and another brother did not. There was no bad blood, and we all respected each other's decisions. While my brother was in the process of setting up the trust, our disabled brother died of natural causes related to his disability. 2 of us had chosen to not make an emotional decision in the wake of my mother's death, and in the end, her wishes never came to fruition because of my brother's death. But if we had all agreed to these wishes, the state of Pennsylvania would have made out like a bandit. Worse yet, I have an adult disabled daughter, and was much more fluent in the ins and outs of providing for a disabled child. I didn't want to come across as greedy or mean, but I knew what the irrevocable trust meant, and they didn't. Story 29. Not a lawyer, but I used to work at a bank in the estates department. I was an administrator who had to manage the files including encroachments upon the capital I.e., I want to take some money out now, please. I had this one account multi-million-dollar trust for one single beneficiary, the son of the deceased. What is interesting is that the son harmed the parents with a hammer in grotesque and brutal fashion. He pleaded insanity. He would call once a year from the penitentiary, mental hospital, requesting $50 for commissary to buy chips and gum. The call was always strange. He was very polite, very doped up. The quality of the call was always very tinny, like he was far away from the phone. Story 30. My grandfather as well had several conditions for our inheritance. Most were kind of out there. The will was broken into several sections. The first section dealt with the estate itself, basically all of the financial parts. My grandfather spent his life in finance and investing. The following sections broke down by family member dealt with the belongings. There wasn't much left because most of it had been given out after my grandmother died many years ago, but 99 of it was all sentimental stuff that would have gone to that person anyway. The other one were things we wouldn't have thought of that he wanted to go to certain people. However, those sections all contained a ton of requirements for each individual that ranged from heartwarming I remember my uncle being required to remain the upright loving person he had always been, to the absurd. For example, my parents were both required to remain left-handed. The only thing I received or really cared about was a 1930 to Philco radio that was the first radio I had ever restored when I was like 10. I was required to promise that I'd keep the old beast as he called it running as long as I owned it. My daughter received a music box from my grandmother's large collection that had always been her favorite. Growing up on the grounds she remains the eldest biological great-granddaughter. She is still to date the only great-grandchild. She also received a couple of puzzles that she had helped him with when we had visited a few times before his death, again on the grounds that she actually finished the darned things because he had never gotten around to it. Actual wording from the will: leave it to my grandfather to give us a reason to laugh after his death. Lol. Story 31. A relative from my dead's side didn't he get married or have a life to care for her sick mother. She lived with her while all her 5 siblings went to live their lives and got their own homes. They all said, throughout their lives, that when the mother died this daughter would get the house since she was the only one caring for her. When the mother died all the siblings got their share. She didn't have any money to buy her, so she was literally thrown out on the street. After caring for their mother all her life, and despite all of them having their own homes, my dad doesn't talk to that part of the family anymore. Story 32. I admit this is a tangent, but I am reminded of a guy who bought an elderly woman's French apartment by agreeing to pay a certain amount monthly until she died. Win-win, right? She gets cash to spend while she is alive while keeping the apartment, and he gets the apartment for cheap because she is old and want to live long. Except that she outlived him. The kicker is that his widow had to continue to pay her. Had she outlived his widow, his children would have had to continue to pay. Story 33. Not a lawyer. My grandfather's will was fairly normal as my grandmother is still alive and received most of it. There was one snag though. One of his witnesses, a paralegal at the time, harmed her husband. That caused some complications. Beyond that and one of the recipients having died before my grandfather, everything went fairly well. Story 30. For my ex-wife said if I was with another woman after her death I would not get the proceeds of her will, and she was adamant. An attorney said that was okay. Well, if you think about it, the will would be in situ forever if I didn't have a girlfriend, in case I did at some point. She didn't get the logic. Story 35. Not a lawyer, but heard this great story. Really wealthy religious Jewish man dies. They read his will and in it he asks to be buried in his socks. Jewish law prohibits this and the family was perplexed because he was a learned man. After much deliberation the rabbis concluded that he cannot be buried in his socks. The family was distraught that they could not fulfill his final wish. Later on they find a letter written by the man. The letter says, I was a wealthy man and had everything I could have asked for, but when I died even my socks couldn't go with me. Know what is really important in life? Story 36. Not a lawyer, etc. When my father was drawing up his will he had each of us pick one thing from his estate we wanted and gave them out as gifts to us. Then there was nothing sentimental left. He made his will with everything being divided equally amongst all heirs with this exception. At the time of his death anyone who was in jail or rehab could not receive anything. Their share would be divided amongst everyone else. Story 37. Disclaimer. This was a story told to me by an estate's attorney. Deceased's father, son was a prior client of the attorney. Son did not really talk to his father but wanted to make sure the estate was wrapped up properly. They did not know if a will existed but knew dad had a safety deposit box. Got a court order to open the box and sure enough a will was in there. The will though left a lion's share of his estate, maybe a few $1,000s, to a woman who no one knew. In with the will were also pictures of a nude woman and a stage name something like Cinnamon or Candy, written on the back. They were able to put two and two together and realize that the father had left part of his estate to a dancer he enjoyed visiting in his older age. She had no idea and they had to track her down, which was also a nightmare I am told. They finally found her and she came to the office for a check accompanied by a male friend. Lawyer assumes he was a pimp. She ended up receiving, as I mentioned above, a few thousand, but it always got me how the old guy left nude photos of her to help identify her. Story 38. Not a lawyer, but had a fun story with my grandma's brother's will. For the last 10 to 15 years he had been paying child support and sending money to this lady who he said was his girlfriend and the child they had together for years his other children, and my grandma had been trying to convince him that the girl was obviously not his. The girlfriend would appear only on payday and stay the bare minimum. The girl called another guy dead and had his last name. The girlfriend insisted he was her friend, but the other children found out he lived with her and all. It was obvious to everyone, except to my great-uncle who we believe was just happy for a nice-looking lady to visit him. He paid for their whole lives, house, school, vacations. The day he died she was the first one at the door. He left her and her kid one each, with a note saying he had given them their inheritance while alive. Now writing this, I wonder if his oldest son actually cheated and got his will changed. I hope not. It was well deserved and my grandma loves to tell how her brother came to his senses at the end. Comment 1. An older gentleman, late 60s age and family friend, was still supporting his two adult sons ages late 30s to early 40s. By allowing them to live rent-free in one of his two houses in a very expensive seaside town and providing them both with paid-for cars fully insured. He had been widowed from the son's mother and had remarried an older woman who never had children. When he unexpectedly died, his will gave everything to his second wife and the two sons got upset about not getting any money or the house. They each only got the cars they had when he died. A couple of mutual acquaintances thought that the sons got a raw deal, but we explained that essentially the sons got their inheritance while he lived. We figured math out that the house was worth upwards of 4,000 a month rent in that town, actual sale value of $900K to $1 million. And the cars with insurance over the years were probably in the range of several hundreds of thousands of dollars. Tough going for the adult son sponges when their father died, but hey, they had to grow up sometime. They probably could have inherited the house had they paid their father for its use while he was alive, or bought the house outright from him for cheap while he lived, but deadbeats are as deadbeats do. Comment to I don't normally do wills in my practice, but when I passed the bar I had a friend who insisted that I do his will. He was trying to give me business, etc. He was a middle-aged, single guy, so it was simple enough. When we sat down to do the paperwork, the first thing I asked him about was who he wanted to take his dog if he died before the dog. He had never thought about it before, and he just could not handle the thought of leaving his dog. He made excuses and bagged off for a long time before just abandoning writing his will. I completely understand. It is not like a fun thing to do,